Not everything that Trump does is bad. I'm Michael Smerconish from the Philly Burbs. Last week, I gave free advice to President Trump on his handling of the Epstein saga. He didn't follow it. Now I have counsel for Democrats who are struggling to find an effective voice in opposition to the president's policies. To the extent there's a common thread among Democrats thus far, it has been to strenuously object to any and everything that Trump does. This approach was on full display this week on the floor of the U.S. Senate when New Jersey Senator Cory Booker excoriated Trump over policing policy.
What I am tired of is when the President of the United States of America violates the Constitution, trashes our norms and traditions. And what does the Democratic Party do? Comply? Allow him? Beg for scraps? No, I demand justice.
Democratic Senator Catherine Cortez Masto, who had tried to pass the bills by unanimous consent, didn't appreciate Booker's stance. As she put it, we can do both. Support our communities, keep them safe, and take on Donald Trump and his bad policies. She makes a good point. Passing laws is a large part of what Congress was created for, and passing popular laws is usually good politics. Nevertheless, I have little doubt that Booker's performance will serve him well, raising his profile and his fundraising. It was yet another I am Spartacus moment, not unlike when he was on his feet for 25 hours earlier this year, lambasting just about everything regarding Trump. That time he even got a book deal out of it with the immodest title of Speech of the Century. But in terms of political effectiveness, I agree with former Senator Claire McCaskill, who said on Morning Joe, Booker knew that if he did what he did on Tuesday, it would be a viral moment and that he would be associated with Democrats who are willing to fight. Willing to fight. Democrats love the idea, and the approach might work for individual politicians, but it's not working for the Democratic Party writ large, and ultimately it bolsters President Trump. Consider that according to a Wall Street Journal poll released last month, the Democratic Party has the lowest approval rating in 35 years. The party is viewed negatively by 63% of American voters. Only 33% give it a favorable view. And that poll was no one-off. A few days prior, a CNN poll found that just 28% viewed Democrats favorably, the lowest number this poll has ever shown. Meanwhile, in the Wall Street Journal survey, President Trump's approval stood at 46%. While this is considerably higher than the Democrats' rating, it's actually better than usual for Trump, but still underwater. Yet Democrats have been unsuccessful in capitalizing on Trump and his more unpopular policies. It might sound counterintuitive, but maybe what's in the party's best interest is to, dare I say, agree with Trump from time to time. Acknowledge wins on issues like NATO, trade, and the border, which have yielded some positive results, even while disagreeing with the way in which they came about. It's a good thing that migration through our previously porous borders has slowed to a trickle, and that our NATO allies have agreed to increase their contribution from 2 to 5% of gross domestic product, and that the markets, despite having just had a rough week, have done well in the year to date. Inflation seems to be tamed. Plus, while Trump's tariff policy looked like it was implemented by the seat of his pants, thus far, all the doomsday fears have not panned out. Bill Maher said it this way on his Club Random podcast.
Just to take an example, tariffs. Now, I remember along with probably most people, were saying at the beginning, oh, you know, by the 4th of July, somebody had to think how the country was, the economy was going to be tanked by then. And I was kind of like, well, that seems right to me, but that didn't happen. Now, it could happen tomorrow. I'm just saying that's reality. So let's work first from the reality of that, not from I just hate Donald Trump. Because that's boring and doesn't get us anywhere and leads you to dishonesty. Because the truth is, I don't know what his strategy is. But look, the stock market is at record highs. I know not everybody lives by the stock market, but I also drive around. I don't see a country in a depression at all. I see people out there just living their lives. And I would have thought, and I got to own it, that these tariffs were going to sink this economy by this time, and they didn't. So, you know, how do we deal with that fact? Because that's the fact.
Like Maher, Brett Stevens is not a fan of Donald Trump. He's a conservative critic who writes for the New York Times. This week, he published under the headline, "The Trump Presidency Takes a Better Turn." Stevens called the first 100 days of Trump 2.0 disastrous, but then said that Trump has more recently been successful, not something the president's, quote, foam-at-the-mouth critics had planned. He notes the strikes against Iran, which took political courage, were effective and did not result in a calamitous war. He lauds the delivery of arms to Ukraine, even if it was belated. And then summing things up, Brett Stevens wrote this. He said, if Trump's opponents want to someday be effective, and let's face it, we haven't been, then we need to come to grips with the realities that have so far eluded us, such as not everything Trump does is bad. Sometimes the president's bad manners and over-the-top tactics achieve useful diplomatic or political results. His about-face on Ukraine is a welcome demonstration that he's capable of changing his mind when the facts don't bear him out. Fulmination and moral hectoring are rarely persuasive, and neither are incessant predictions of doom that never quite materialize. Americans will listen to Democrats when they propose better solutions to common problems, not when they openly root for the administration to fail. I've lambasted the administration over and over again, both in its current and previous term, and I'm sure I will again. But while it's never fun to be fair to those you dislike, it's also healthy. For criticism to be credible, it cannot be blind. I say that's a worthwhile reminder to a party that competes to outdo one another in condemnation of everything Trump. Mark Halpern made a similar point this week in his newsletter, observing, Democrats in their heartfelt anger and indignity continue to throw every available stone, stick, wrench, spanner, and kitchen sink at the head of the giant. But that kitchen sink strategy isn't working so well. Actually, that's not fair. It is working. It's working well for Donald J. Trump. 2 impeachments, 4 indictments, endless investigations, constant carping about Trump, and condescension toward his supporters. At some point, it all blends into background noise, such that when something truly egregious happens, like the firing of the person whose job it is to track labor statistics, nobody pays attention. The outrage loses its edge, the tree falls, and the forest shrugs. It all brings me to today's poll question at Smerconish.com. Agree or disagree, it is in the political best interests of Democrats to publicly give President Trump credit when he accomplishes something with which they concur. Joining me now to discuss, CNN senior political and global affairs commentator Rahm Emanuel, former ambassador to Japan under President Biden, former chief of staff under President Obama. Okay, Mr. Ambassador, you heard the thesis. Go ahead and respond to it.
Well, look, I think part of the thesis is correct, but there's a premise, if I could, that I think is off. One is, if you look at Virginia governor's race, you look at New Jersey governor's race. In New Jersey, the Democrat is up 20 points. You also in Virginia, the Republicans are walking away from their nominee. You look at every special election or primary since November, and Democrats are doing exceptionally well because there's a high turnout. So I do think you have to have a little more of a, what I would describe, listening to you, a jiu-jitsu strategy. Because if you're shrill all the time, you're just shrill and you'll be turned off. And it's a kind of an approach that I think the Democrats have to actually attack where there's a vulnerability, as I think there is on this quote-unquote big, beautiful bill, which is going to raise taxes, plus the tariffs, going to raise taxes on middle-class families, and it's going to cut health care costs for middle-class families while giving the wealthy a tax break. And that's a legitimate hit, and it has the benefit of being true. And then the other part of it is not just fighting Trump, but Democrats got to be seen and get caught fighting for America, which is slightly different approach. And that's kind of, I think, where there's a piece of that has to be filled out. Certain things like on education, national service, I believe certain things on home ownership is a proper place to go for Democrats.
How about you personally, as you look toward 2028, potentially? I did a rudimentary search of your social media speeches and interviews that you've given recently. I couldn't find an area where Ambassador Rahm Emanuel said, look, I don't like the guy, I don't like the politics, but I have to say, in this instance, he achieved a result that was worthwhile.
Well, I mean, if you wanted to, and I think it's indicative of what you said, Michael, just earlier when you look at Brett Stevens' piece, he pointed to 2 places in foreign policy, not domestic. I don't agree with cutting taxes for the wealthy. and raising taxes on middle-class families. I don't agree, having played an instrument role in providing health care for those who are uninsured, raising their premiums, which is exactly what's going to happen with this one big, beautiful bill. And I disagree with it. And I have no bones about pointing it out. Now, I do also, as a guy that was responsible for President Clinton for designing Operation Gatekeeper in San Diego, Operation Safeguard in Dallas, that you have a tough border enforcement and properly to prevent illegal border crossings in the country. But I don't agree, by way of example, with going into churches, hospitals, schools, or workplaces to take people who are legitimately going about their lives and approach that. And approach immigration where you're supposed to do, and in fact, the Republicans have criticized this, you're supposed to deal with criminal elements, not people that are going about their lives contributing to the betterment of America. I think it's wrong to do that. And it's okay to say good on the border, wrong in the workplace, wrong in the place of worship, wrong in hospitals, wrong actually on the steps of a court where people are trying to follow the law and you nab them. And it's like some sting operation.
I appreciated a George Will profile of you recently, and he used words like practical and centrist to describe Rahm Emanuel. Those are attributes in my book, and I think in the book of most Americans. I don't know, but I don't know that practicality and centrism sells in your own party. I mean, in line with the thesis that I've offered today about how to reach people with credibility.
Let me say one thing, which I think Washington, specifically in the political class, have wrong. And I used the New Jersey Democratic primary as a classic example to illustrate this point. There were 5 candidates that were running. The mayor of Newark, the biggest city in New Jersey, the mayor of Jersey City, the president of a teachers union, a very powerful interest group within the Democratic Party, 2 members of Congress who came out of the moderate wing of the party. High turnout. 50% of the vote went into the combination of the 2 moderate members of Congress, not the mayor of Newark or Jersey City. And I think you have this template, and I used to say this to President Obama, President Clinton, I used to say it to myself when I was mayor, which is, sound is not always fury. And you have this view because there are people with social media that is loud or screaming. Doesn't mean they represent a lot of people. It just means they're loud. And so you have this template that this is what the Democrats are. But Democrats just in New Jersey, a kind of a model state, just rewarded the 2 moderate candidates or centrist candidates, whatever ideological category you want to, or label you want to apply to them. So I actually think the view of who makes up the Democratic primary voter may not be totally accurate. And then second,
a final question.
We have an obligation.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
A final question. I want to test your pop culture chops and my own. Are you offended by the way in which American Eagle and Sydney Sweeney are selling jeans?
No, look, I think with all the things that we have to worry about, and I understand the history of eugenics in America and what it led to historically, given World War II. In fact, a lot of Adolf Hitler's theories come out of American eugenics. I'm not offended, and it's not something that occupies my mental space. I have other things to worry about. I think people got to get themselves and really focus on what is the priority. Now, you want to go do that? That's on your time, your dime. That's not where I focus my time.
All right, give me the 30-second explanation of this. I think it's self-evident. I think it's self-evident, but I love this. I love this. The worse the cell phone coverage, the nicer the nicer the people are.
Yeah. So when I leave the mayor's office, when I was congressman, let me back up, I introduced the Great Lake Restoration Act to restore the Great Lakes environmental ecological quality. And it was always a piece of what I wanted to do, but from Congress to Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee to Obama's chief staff, never had an opportunity to do it, and mayor. So the day after I leave, I decided, a buddy of mine, that we're going to bike the whole area of Lake Michigan, 984 miles, 13 days, average 65 miles a day. And I realized as we're climbing up, and we started on Montrose Beach in Chicago, as we're going up Michigan, the worse and spottier the cell phone service were, kinder and gentler and more compassionate people were. And I actually think a lot of, and the other thing, and I'm guilty of this, like you, we have a cynical view of people. We have a predisposition about how Americans are. And I'll give you one anecdote. I'm up in not the UP part of Michigan, but the upper part of the Mid. And some guy wearing a NRA hat keeps looking over at me, and I'm having a burger after a long day of riding. And he starts to make his way over. My stomach just tightens up like this, pulls up a chair, and we start talking. And he knows my background of passing the assault weapon ban and the Brady bill for President Clinton. And we go at it, talking, etc. I don't convince him. He doesn't convince me. But we had a real discussion about the difference between what gun control can do for a city of Chicago versus what gun control can do or would do or affect in upstate Michigan. We heard each other. We didn't convince each other, but we listened. And probably the biggest problem with cell phone coverage or cell phone or technology, we're not doing a good job of listening. We're doing a good job of talking. And so that, and I'm probably as good, probably a biggest violator of that myself. And I thought that was an observation, as it said, as it's true.
I would sum it up by saying mingling is a good thing. Mayor, nice to have you, and you'll come back, I hope. For everybody at home, what are your thoughts? Hit me up on social media. I'll read some responses throughout the course of the program from the world of X. In theory, yes, says Doty, but since Trump has not done anything positive in his latest administration, it's a moot point. Okay, come on. This is to the poll question and the premise, which is to say Democrats and opponents of Donald Trump would have more credibility with people that they need to reach, not with one another. You already have them. If every once in a while they acknowledge that there's been an achievement with which they actually agree. Now, Doty just said, well, there haven't been any. I offered you two in my opening commentary. Is it not a good thing that the porous border crossings have slowed to a trickle? Is it not a good thing that our NATO allies have agreed to move from 2 to 5% of GDP? I think they're both good things. Why not say it? You'll enhance your credibility, not diminish it. Go to my website at Smerconish.com and answer today's poll question. It's agree or disagree. It is in the best political interests of the Democrats to publicly give President Trump credit when he accomplishes something with which they concur. Up ahead, the Washington Post with exclusive reporting that the Trump administration wants to cover expensive weight loss drugs under Medicare and Medicaid. Some question if we can afford to do that. I ask, can we afford not to do it? Please make sure that you're signing up for the newsletter at Smerconish.com, for which Steve Breen just drew this.